So do you want me to do that again or no?
Yeah, do it again.
Okay, all right. Okay, let me find it. Hang on. Let me find it. Bear with me.
That's fine.
Boom. All right. Welcome to the Influential Christian Entrepreneur Podcast, where we uncover the inspiring stories and strategies of successful Christian entrepreneurs. My name is Chris Rickerson, and I am so blessed to be your host today. Today's guest is Francine Sinclair, and boy, do we have a show in store for you today. Most of you know how amazing Francine is. What you may not be aware of is the amount of adversity that Francine and her family have had to overcome, and how hard she has worked to leave her past behind her and carve out a new life in her community and in Christ. If you've ever seen the fascinating movie The American Gangster starring Denzel Washington, then you already know it's about a drug kingpin named Frank Lucas and importing heroin into the United States during the Vietnam War. He made it to the pinnacle, to the top of the drug trade, and today I bring you Francine Sinclair, the daughter of Frank Lucas, who Denzel depicted in that movie. Francine, thank you for allowing me to host you today.
Thank you, Chris. I was saying that it is so weird to have somebody else hosting me on my own show, but I couldn't have thought of a better host than you. You and I, we share a lot of things in common, and I think that's why your wife suggested that you be the host for this show to interview me. So I'm excited about this conversation, and let's see where it goes.
That is awesome. Awesome. Can you kind of run us through your childhood and you know how Francine, how your life started, and kind of run us through the gamut?
Yeah, so I was born in. Many people know that I call myself Puerto Rican, which I am. I'm half Puerto Rican, but I really was born in Englewood, New Jersey, which is Bergen County. I grew up with. When I was born, my mother was a stay-at-home mom. My father, as you know, was a drug kingpin, and notorious one during that time. And I had my brother, my half-brother, who lived with us, and we had other family members as well. You know, we had a dog. We lived in a suburban, middle-class neighborhood in that area. This is 70s. Then we just I had a pretty normal family life. This was my early childhood, but then things after, by the time I was about 3 or 4 years old, that's when justice caught up with my dad, and unfortunately that's when things started to spiral out of control. Now, to go back a little bit, there was no, as far as religious beliefs or any faith-based beliefs, there wasn't any in my family. My mother's side came from a Catholic background, and but she was not a practicing Catholic, and my father came from a Baptist background. He was from the South, North Carolina, and Black churches, Black Baptist church, that was my grandmother's background, my family's background, but at home we didn't practice anything. So after justice caught up with my dad, everything changed, because then my half-brother, myself, and my mother were forced to go into witness protection program, and then from there we had to go on and move to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then it was a completely different situation, because then I was my mom was a single mom and raising me and my brother. And so, there's a huge contrast from the beginning of my childhood to like growing up. It was a complete and different contrast. And then, of course, having a father that's not present, which consisted of visiting him in prison. But once we moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, I could no longer see him. It was just mostly phone calls. So, I say all that to say that a lot of people are always looking for, the reason why they get into that type of world is because they want to improve their life. They want to have all the good things that the world can offer. But it's almost the same thing as if you're going to go that route, it's the same thing as making a pact with the devil, because you'll have, those good things for a while, but there's always going to be a hefty price to pay. And it's not just you who's going to pay that price. It's going to be all of those around you, especially if you have children. Those who you sought to, make things better, their lives better, give them everything. Those who you sought to do those things for are actually going to pay the price. And it's probably could be worse than the price you're paying. So that was, in a nutshell, my childhood. Yeah.
So, for those that have not seen the movie, or for people who have, and it is a movie, how that story was depicted in the movie, is that a pretty accurate depiction? Is some of that embellished? I know that in the movie, I think like 30% of the New York City police officers were arrested for corruption, and like how much of that story is factual?
I think that it was accurate. I would say, if I were to put a percentage to it, I think it was maybe 66% accurate. But yes, a lot of the officers went down. That did happen, where he went to the Philippines. So all of the major points did happen. So all of the big things, maybe some of the details, like, for example, I wasn't there at all. I had been born by birth. The way that arrest happened, it never happened in a church. It was in our house. So, there were things that were changed. But for sure, a lot of that was, now exactly the detail of what might have been changed, I'm not completely sure, because, I didn't personally have firsthand knowledge of a lot of those things. But based on what I've heard or had heard from my dad, a lot of it was accurate.
So I was able to share a little of my story on your podcast, and how I sold drugs and I followed a life of crime, and I wound up homeless and facing a lot of prison time. But in my mind, I know what it's like to be a young, ambitious, driven person and apply that in a negative direction. And I saw the same thing. I saw selling drugs as an opportunity to in my mind, I think, to improve my life. And you and I had discussed previously how when I was in a ring of meth cooks, and when I got to the top of what that was, it was not what I envisioned it to be. It was a deception. It was a never-ending goalpost. And I understand that your family made it to the legit, the real top of what that would look like. And in all cases, it appears to destroy, even when you get to that pinnacle. Do you think that the top looks like what the young, you're targeting, with your podcast, you're targeting Christian entrepreneurs. Well, there are a lot of entrepreneurs who are not Christian entrepreneurs, who are on the corner selling drugs and applying themselves in that.
Yeah, that's entrepreneurship, just not a good one. My dad had his own brand.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Yeah.
What would you say to those young entrepreneurs that are trying to apply themselves in that way?
It does. When you get to that point where you got just money coming in, it feels great, for a while, but then you come to realize that the things that start happening, you start attracting people that you wouldn't otherwise have attracted, that don't have their best intentions in mind. There's a lot of predatory people that come around you. You think that money is going to insulate you from things. No, it actually makes you more vulnerable, because everybody's after you for something, right?
Yeah.
Not only that, you always have to be looking over your shoulder, because not do you just not have people after you, then you have, law enforcement might already be, on your tail. It's not easy work either. People think, I'll just sit down, and it's as hard. The work is just as hard. I don't know about your experience, but it's not easy work. It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of you have to, and I'm speaking from secondhand experience, but I didn't see it as being something, looking at it from the outside, it did not look like it was something easy to do. It's like a business, right? So doesn't matter if it's entrepreneurship on the illegal side or the legal side. There has to be a plan, there has to be a strategy. And imagine being an entrepreneur and having to look out for people trying to shoot you, hurt your family, take your money, and or lock you up. That's a lot of extra things that when you're on a regular entrepreneurship, you don't have to watch out for. So it lasts for a while, but the price that there is to pay is so out of whack to what you got. You'll feel like you got nothing after it's all said and done. You traded it all in for nothing. Your peace of mind, your freedom, your mental health, everything. You're trading everything for a short-term gain, long-term pain. It's not worth it at all. I don't know how you felt.
So I wrote a short list of, kind of what I envisioned, which was when you get to the top that you have cars and money and houses and women and all of these like earthly, fleshly things. But when you get to the top, what you have is you have worry and paranoia and backstabbing and prison and death and destruction. And it's like a ploy of the enemy to use these attractive things for you to sell your soul. The Bible says, what does it gain a man for you to gain the whole world but lose your soul? And it is a trade-off.
And it's an uneven trade-off.
Yes.
It's so lopsided.
When your dad, how much time did your dad do in prison?
Okay, so he got out, he negotiated. He turned in a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Okay, he was slated to do, I don't know how many years, 70 years. And so let's say it all started when I was like 3 or 4. He got out when I was like 17.
What happened when he got out? So that's that's part of the story that nobody knows from the movie. He got out early.
Well, I wasn't living with him. So after we left Albuquerque, New Mexico, my mom and we moved to Puerto Rico with her side of the family, her parents. I grew up in Puerto Rico. Like I went to Puerto Rico, I was in Puerto Rico from the time I was in 3rd grade all the way through college. So when he got out, he was here in the States. I didn't live with him, so I can't give every detail, but when he got out, I remember he moved to Texas. He was living with my brother. He got employment, some type of employment over there. At one point, he was even working, doing some work for the Richie Roberts, the guy who Russell Crowe did in the movie. The cop.
Yeah.
They had become really close friends. So they were when my dad passed in 2019, Richie Roberts was there.
So I thought, and I could be wrong, I thought that I read somewhere that he got out early and then got in more trouble and had to go back, or is that a different?
Well, that's why he got out when I was 17. So initially he got out when I was like 10, then got back in trouble, and then got out again when I was 17.
What happened the first time he got out at 10? What happened? Why did he wind up going back?
Well, the same reason why many people who get caught up in the justice system go back, recidivism. When you go to prison, for you to be hired, and you know this because you're in the staffing industry, you know this better than me, how difficult it is for you to get gainful employment anywhere, because you go to prison and it's like you did your time, but that doesn't mean that you actually did your time.
Yeah.
Right. Like, who is going to hire anywhere Frank Lucas? Okay. Look at his rap sheet. Who wants this type of employee? Nobody, right? So, but, if he would have turned to God, right? If he would have turned to Christ, if he would have changed his life, that would have been a different story. But when you don't, then what are your options? Take another deal from the devil. Basically, that's what it is. To alleviate that temporary pain. but then there's always another, again, you're going to pay the price again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's what happened. If there were a way for people, once they complete their sentences, to be able to reintegrate truly into society and have opportunities happen to, that would reduce a lot of. And then we get into the whole narrative of, the prison industrial system, how it's now private and how it behooves those people to have more people in those beds. So, it's not a problem that our society has ever really wanted to fix.
Yeah.
And so he went back
Yeah.
that second time, same way.
Yeah.
Same way, not nearly as big,
Yeah.
but climbing,
Yeah.
And I wasn't there, so I can't give you the level of detail, but basically that's what he did. Still had contacts, still had the know-how, still know how to do things. People approach you, help me do this because you know how to do it. There's this much in it for you. You don't have to get involved as much.
Yeah. So it was a sting deal, a setup deal, or
No,
no?
it wasn't, but initially. But then it was. Somehow, I guess somebody got infiltrated in there, and then, it became that.
Yeah,
But it
and
didn't
that's
start out that way. That's as much as I know.
That's that whole watching your back and having to worry and getting robbed and set up and
But then in this time, my mom went too.
in 20 when you were 10.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I was there when that happened.
You were in Las Vegas. Yeah, walk us through
Because they
that.
involved her in all of that too, and it was like both gone. They were both gone because my mom and I were in Las Vegas when that happened, and I was literally there when they came in. It was just me and my mom. The not the cops, the FBI actually. Guns drawn and the whole 9 yards. So that was my second traumatic experience. And then they put me on a plane from Las Vegas to Puerto Rico by myself to my grandparents' house, which I got lucky because they were going to take me to a foster place in Vegas.
Yeah.
I happened to be lucky enough that Joe Louis, the famous boxer.
Blessed. You're blessed.
Joe Louis was, I guess he was like my godfather, and his wife was the first female black attorney in the U.S., Martha Lewis, and she happened to be out in Vegas, and she was able to do whatever she needed to do out there to get me on that plane to Puerto Rico versus going to a foster home. That night, I remember 2 cops staying with me in the hotel room, taking me to the airport in the morning, putting me on a plane.
Wow.
By myself. So then I lost this time my mother, but I was I went to go live with my grandparents in Puerto Rico, where we had been living after we left Albuquerque, New Mexico for some years. So I was already in school, I was already familiar. But imagine going on a summer vacation with your mom. Oh, I'm going to have fun, this is going to be great. And coming back, like, where's your mom? What happened? It was extremely traumatic. So yeah. And your dad, where did he go, by the way? So it was
people, adults who have been through a lot of trauma like that, can look at children and understand how resilient children are, right? In a way that maybe people who have children who have not been through a lot of trauma, who have a relatively comfortable life, don't know how resilient children are. So, you've came through that. You're bigger, you're better, you're stronger, you're bolder. It was traumatizing, but you have an understanding of how resilient children are.
How resilient children are.
Yeah.
But then I think that also, I don't know about you, because I know that you also had experiences in your childhood where you had to deal, your mom, etc. But that does, for me, it made me be sort of an overprotective parent. I don't know about you.
It's a little different for me, I think.
Is it?
Yeah. I am protective. On the sense of where are you going, and you're not. And I didn't give my kids a phone until they were, 16, and I am worried about them using drugs. I'm very worried about that and protective of that. So I'm not loose with like my kids go wherever they want and do whatever they want. I'm very protective like that. But I look at it and say my childhood was jacked up. And
That's what I tell them all the time. Mine was jacked up. You guys have no idea.
I came out of it okay, right? So I'm like, hey, look, if I can have that childhood and come out of it okay, my kids can handle it. If I, what they have no clue. So I'm like, I'm not too hard on myself with like, do I have them in a bunch of sports and am I running myself ragged trying to be this perfect parent? Look, my mom was a mess, and I came through it okay, and I don't have to be a perfect parent. I can be a great parent, and I can give it my all, and that's good enough. They're going to be okay.
As good as you can do is a lot better than what you were given.
Yes. Yes.
3,000%.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how much you talk about that with your kids, but like, I don't give them all the gritty details, but I'm like, you don't have any idea of how good you have it.
Yeah.
You know?
So, you lost your mom and your dad to prison. Tell us about, your family, all of your uncles and all of their, like, just not to like dig up the dirt, but to run through the negative consequences of when the illusion of this is going to take you somewhere, and then the reality of, not only did he destroy his own life, his wife's life, your childhood, but also his brothers, how far reaching was the destruction in your family?
I was insulated from that a lot. My mom did kind of insulate me from whatever was happening, like on my dad's side of the family. But I would go visit almost every summer. And my grandmother was like the biggest figure there. Like, she was like, I had such a good relationship with my grandmother, who was depicted in the movie. She was a saint in my eyes. And I would go there. I used to love to go visit her every summer. But yeah, a lot of his brothers also did time because they were involved in it. And so that had repercussions for their families, their children. It was just like a epidemic, like a virus that just spread, and from the parents to the children and the grandchildren. It's like a generational curse, right? And I'm not saying that everybody got involved in that stuff, but the consequences of what happens when you go to prison and then you come out and then you're not able to find employment, and then it's just a death spiral. And so it was up to many of us, myself included, and a few other of, I guess, my grandmother's grandchildren, to take it upon ourselves to kind of break that. Some did, some didn't. As you know, he had a lot of brothers and sisters. There were a total of about 9. So there were so many, but there were many of us who took it upon ourselves to break those generational curses, and when you have to do that, it's pretty hard to do that, actually. So I can say that my grandmother was resilient, but imagine the things that my grandmother had to go to with all of her sons.
Oh, horrible.
Like, it wasn't just one.
Yeah.
Right? Because the girls were not involved in any of that. She had 3 daughters. They were not involved in any of that. But it was all the boys. And, it was just god-awful. On my dad's side, luckily, we were able to stop that there, me and my brother. But, he also had other children. My father had other children, that did not live out in our household, weren't part of that household. So, but because I lived on my mother's side in Puerto Rico, things were pretty normal over there, except for the exception of my mom. But thankfully, I had that side of my family that was my life was so much easier by having that available to me than if I had to live with my dad's side of the family. It was complete chaos on that side. Complete and utter chaos. In fact, my grandfather on the other side didn't even like me going over there in the summer, but it was fine. But over on this other side, I went to school, I had my friends. The hardest part about growing up was I never wanted to tell people where my parents were. I don't know if they knew, and people probably knew, but I would never, I'm like, where is your dad? We're like, to my friends in school, like, oh, they live in the United States. They live in New York. I just like, kind of like that, whatever, make up whatever story at the time. Mm-hmm. And like when school events and stuff like that, my grandparents would go, but I never have my mom or my dad show up there. And my mom was gone for about 4 years, though. She wasn't gone for that long. She came out right in time for when I was like 15. So at that point, did you go back and live with her again, or no? She was living with us with my grandparents in my grandparents' home.
Did she change for the better at that point?
Yeah, she did. She, started in real estate. Then, she did several other things. And I think that during the time we were in Puerto Rico, she did improve. But then, we lived a pretty normal life. And at one time, she was almost married, right, with the gentleman that I spoke about in my book, that we were in New Mexico. But then that broke off when that relationship broke off. We stayed with my grandparents and my grandmother in Puerto Rico. So, I was going to school. She was being the single mom, doing the single mom type of thing. And I went through college, and that's how I grew up, But then by the time I was 17, my dad was out, so I would go visit him in the summers. But it was never the same. It was never the same. It was broken, a family unit that was completely just imagine an explosion and all the shards just everywhere. It could never be cohesive again. But I did have a good relationship with my dad, and I had a good relationship with my mom. My mom and my dad had a good relationship. So, but it wasn't worth it at all.
How did he handle that in the end? As he comes to the conclusion of his life and all the damage and destruction and the top and the fall and the whole thing. How do you think that shaped him in his, speaking of resiliency and how things impact us, and we can be resentful or we can be grateful, or how was his overall in the end? As he comes to the conclusion of his life, was he regretful, remorseful?
Yeah, I think he was regretful and remorseful. Especially, he had a lot of time to reflect on that. Especially when the movie came out, where he was forced to talk about things and publicly, publicly and be judged publicly and all that. I feel like first he got caught up in the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Oh, yeah. But then as he had time to reflect and talk about that. He did show remorse about that, and wishing that he would have made better choices, because, it was a choice. In his mind, when he started in this path, he was a teenager from the Jim Crow South, right? Who was just looking for a way to get out of poverty, whatever you need to do. But it's a slippery slope. It turned into a slippery slope that at one point, like you stated, it's kind of like a never-ending goalpost.
Yeah.
You just get caught up and you want more, and I'm going to stop, but let me do this one thing. And I'm going to stop and let me do this one thing. Had he had the ability, he was smart enough, intelligent enough that he could have been successful in almost any other business area, right? But he chose the wrong one. And so he saw that. Even though he was not an educated person in terms of academic smarts, he was very intelligent. So there was I saw a lot of remorse. Now, like you asked me, was he actually saved? I don't know, because I wasn't a Christian back then. See, he passed in 2019. I became a Christian in 2020. I didn't know what that entailed, salvation entailed. For me, we kind of just all go to the same place, unless you were like really, really wicked. And although he had done some really, really wicked things, I thought that maybe the remorse that he had was enough to get him to, heaven. But now that I'm a Christian and I can see what you're specifically, did he accept Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior? Did he repent and ask for forgiveness? I don't know that, because I didn't live with him. And although I was the last person on the phone, I was on the phone with him as he died. I didn't know any better. I didn't know to ask him. I didn't know what to do. So, he potentially didn't, because he probably didn't know how. But I'll never know until I get there myself.
Well,
and that's the hard thing.
I don't know if I told you this, but my grandfather called me. We were in Mexico on vacation, and he said, "Chris, I'm dying. He's in the hospital." He said, "I'm dying." He said, "I've got prostate cancer." And, I don't remember. It was a very short conversation. In that conversation, I asked him, I said, "Grandpa, have you ever given your heart to the Lord?" And he said, I don't remember what he said, because I kind of dismissed it because I was going in for the close anyway. Even if he said yes, I said, "Hey, do you want to recommit right now?" And I got to tell you that was one of the most powerful moments in my life. Not because I knew my grandpa well. My grandpa was a hard man. I didn't really know him. I have a memory of him holding me down as a child and slapping me once. I probably deserved it, right? But he was a really hard man. But and so for me, well, that moment was so powerful, because here he is. He's supposed to be the man of the family, right? And here's the grandson leading him to the father. And he did. He recommitted his heart right there, and he died like 2 days later. What a beautiful, powerful thing. And the only reason you didn't do that then is because you didn't know what you were made for. You weren't living in that role, and you didn't know what you were made for. But today, today you know that. And
Today
you are.
I know that, but isn't it too late?
Well, it's too late for him, but the Bible says, Romans 8:28 says, all things work for the good of those that love him and are called according to his purpose. And that's you. You're called according to his purpose. What does that mean? In the world, living for him with purpose and intentionality to lead people to him. And so it's a beautiful thing that even in that moment, you see, I had a friend who died of fentanyl, and when I got clean, he got prison. So I was 11 years into rebuilding my life. And he did 11 years in prison, and I would go get him from the halfway house, and I would take him to church. And I asked him, I said, "Hey, man," he was going to church to see his girlfriend, right? I asked him, I said, "Hey, man, do you want to give your heart to the Lord?" And he said, "No, I'm not ready." And a year later, he died from fentanyl. And you could look at that and say, well, what good comes out of that? Because no good comes out of that. He died. But no, that's wrong. All things work for the good of those that love him and are called according to his purpose. You know what happened the next time I had a kid out in my parking lot that was on fentanyl, or the homeless guy that was up the road on fentanyl? Let me tell you, I didn't take no so easily. I harassed that damn homeless guy, nodding off with his sign, and I got him into detox, and I paid his first week's rent at an Oxford house and got him in a sober living home and changed his life. The good that came out of that was I won't take no so easy next time, because it might be my last time.
Yeah.
And it's a parallel story with your father. You didn't get to in that moment, but that moment will fuel you for future moments in your life that you will win some and you will capture some, because that's God's will, and that is going to fuel you.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that. That's beautifully said, for sure, because there's nothing we can do now after after they've passed. And so, but I'm like you. I know people right now that will probably. I have a cousin that, throughout the years I've tried to broach this subject, and because one time I was in a type of church which ended up being more like a cult, and I tried to approach him, and he would not listen. And even in 2020, I talked to him about it, and he's like, "No, I don't believe that." But now I have more conviction, so next time I see him, I will be a little bit more intentional, because I know the consequences are real. So
yeah, they are real. Well, praise God.
Yeah.
Um, anything I missed that you want to
Anything
share?
you missed? Well, it's just funny how God uses us, because each and every one of us has a testimony, and it doesn't have to be. Some people say, I don't really have a testimony because their life was boring and they lived in a house with a picket fence and two parents and a dog, and they grew up as Christians, and everything perfect in their life. But there is a testimony, because it's not just about when you encounter Christ, what your testimony was that moment when you realize, okay, I need to follow Christ, but every day of your life is a testimony. Yeah, that's huge, what happened in my life and how I came to Christ, which was, I thought it was by accident. Of course it's not by accident. But part of what we should do as Christians is share our testimony, so that it inspires others who are going to resonate with that and say, if that was her life and this is her life now, then maybe I want to explore this. That's why we can't stay quiet. That's part of the reason why I share it, and that's part of the reason why you share yours, because people who would otherwise not be interested in taking a look at Jesus, they might be in a similar lifestyle, or having experienced similar things like you and I have experienced, and then think, okay, I have something in common with this guy or this girl, and look into it. And for sure, now I'm all about this. I'm all about God's business, because I was given grace. Like, how many times, oh my God, how many times I could have died 20 times over in my life. And it took a post on social media for me to find Jesus. And so I'm like, if social media is a way for people to reach people and for people to do business, and so many people are online scrolling for hope, why aren't we using it? So I'm all about this digital evangelism and encouraging people to share their testimonies and use their content and their personal brand to inspire people to take a look at Jesus and want to know more.
Well, he's a healer. And I don't know about you, but he healed my heart and he healed my mind and he gave me great wisdom. And so I don't know if he's healed your heart from what you went through, but it seems like he has healed your heart. You are.
He's in the process of doing that. And I was just telling your wife the other day how he not healed. You are 180 degree. He renewed. You are a new creation. You're a new creature.
Yeah, praise God.
Because I saw your picture that you sent me when you were in the depths of hell, basically.
Yeah.
And your life back then, and your life now, and even your appearance, you're a different person. So he literally takes you and turns you into a different person. That's what the old you dies, and new you is born. And my gosh.
And guess what? Hey, that transition can take as long as you want it to take.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I could never have, you can give your heart to the Lord and not submit to him. And it's the submission that creates the change. The first step is to submit and say, I'm yours, change me, use me, help me, make me who you want me to be. But I resisted that. I said a prayer and thought I was good and go to church. I resisted it. There was no change, and if there's no change, it's not real. And so, it's God's first promise. The old man dies and a new man rises. It's one of the first promises, but it was one of the last that I saw. And I for a long time I ran from my past. I didn't want to talk about my past. I was ashamed of my past. And I want to encourage you and empower you that you are part of a story. And I'm not sure if it's my past of being a drug dealer that makes me so drawn to the story. But I'm very drawn. It's such a if you have dreams or have had dreams to be somebody in the drug trade, that is a very captivating story.
Yeah.
And I think that by opening up about that and becoming more, hey, the more you become vocal about that, the more people are going to be drawn. I mean, I'm reading your book, and it's such a captivating story. Now, I'm not sure if that's because of my past that I'm so captivated by that story, or if that's just going to be all people. But either way, what I know is that your following and your reach and what you're doing, I think you should leverage that. I really do believe you should leverage it, because you're going to draw people that otherwise would not be drawn, and your things that you're doing are going to become that much larger.
Right.
Yeah,
And I find that to be true. That people who have a taste of that lifestyle in whichever way, maybe
yeah,
directly or maybe a husband or father, are very drawn to that. And that's why we have to use our personal testimony.
yeah,
We need more God in this world, in our country, and the reason why things are so crazy right now is because we've moved away from God.
yeah.
And it's time to get back. It's time to
Go back.
start moving in that
Yeah.
in that direction. And part of the reason that we have moved away and we become kind of desensitized to it, and we don't, is because we've allowed people to tell us, don't talk about faith, because that's something that's personal, that you don't offend people with that because they're Muslims, they're a Buddhist, they're what. You know what? Never conform to what the world is telling you. Never
Yeah.
listen to ungodly advice. What does the Bible tell us? What did Jesus tell us? He
Make
told us
disciples of all nations.
and spread the good news to every creature, right? That's
Yeah.
what Jesus told us to do. So we as Christians need to do what the Bible says and not what the world tells us, because that's how they have taken over everything.
Yeah.
And things are the way they are. So
Well,
let's start moving in the opposite direction.
yes, and for people who may not be comfortable doing that, or it hasn't become ingrained in their lives on a daily basis, what I would say to that is that it's just a stretch. You just reach a little, and you reach a little, and you try a little, and the more you just are willing to go out on that little limb. I'm going to go out, I'm going to talk about it at lunch, or I'm going to, whatever those little limbs are, the more confident, the more bold the Spirit is going to become in you, the more you push yourself, and the more you put at risk. And then eventually you wind up, because sometimes people can look and they can say, I could never be that. I could never do that. I can't become that. How do you get to that? Well, submission and willingness, and just slowly stretching yourself until, for me, I got to a point where I don't care if it costs me everything, right? If you don't want to do this with me, but it didn't just happen. It wasn't like one day I was like, hey, I'm going to go share Jesus with everyone. No.
That's it. You hit the nail on the head when you said you have to get to that point where you're willing to put it all on the line.
Yeah.
And you don't care what it's going to cost you. When you get to that point, that's when when you realize that the priority is God, and not what people think.
Yeah.
Then you're good to go.
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing is I can tell you I've been down that road where I had nothing and I was selling drugs, and even if I look back at when things were good and I was selling drugs, it wasn't really good. And that what I have today is I have joy, peace. I go back to every relationship I was ever in was plagued with trust issues. Why? Because I sold drugs for a living. You can't trust anyone. So every relationship I was in was, where you going, where you been, what have you been doing, all of that, like, nastiness.
Yes.
And then when I met my wife, I waited until marriage with her. Mm-hmm. And guess what? It didn't have to be like, where are you going, what have you been doing, where are you at? She wasn't sleeping with me. I didn't have to worry about what she was doing.
Yeah.
It's a prime example of, if we'll build our life on a foundation of Christ, all of that other stuff, that nastiness that comes along with it, melts away. It's way different. And the fruit of joy, peace, fulfillment. Like, I know what I was made for. Mm-hmm. I was made for you too, and you know what you were made for, and you're made to lead people to the Father. And so my hat is off to you and the work that you do, and I can't thank you enough for letting me host you.
Thank you, and I encourage everybody who's listening, share your testimony. If that doesn't mean you need to go out on the street corner with a sign, it's as simple as sharing stories on social media. Write a post about how you came to Christ. Write a post about how Christ is working in your life.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, that will have an impact on somebody that you don't know even, you know. So as Christians, do what Jesus told you to do and share your testimony far and wide. And it gets easier as you go along, and don't be afraid of criticism of what people think. Remember, it's much better to deny the world than to deny Christ. So let's move in that direction and change the marketplace.
That's right. One last thing. So you mentioned your book, and
I have not published my book.
I know. Do you have a name for it? Do you have a name for your book yet?
I don't. I never published it because I didn't feel like it was finished. Now that my life has changed and I've met Jesus, I feel like I can finish this book, even though my life isn't done. But I feel like now I can complete this book. So I don't know what it's going to be called. But
That's too bad, because if you did, we could go ahead and prep the public right now.
yeah, I don't know what it's called. I wrote the first part of this book in 2014. It's been 10 years. I've changed a lot. So it's going to be interesting. Yeah.
I think you should steal that the daughter of the American gangster. You know.
The American dancer's daughter. So I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be it. But yeah, it's going to be like part 1 and part 2. Literally 10 years apart. So we'll see what's going to happen. I'll let everybody know when it does go live.
Well, I'm excited to call you a friend and a sister in Christ, and I'm again very grateful.
Yes. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you everybody for listening to this bonus or special edition of the Influential Christian Entrepreneur. Take care. See you soon.